Hi there, welcome to Chapter 8. We're talking about developing a global vision through marketing research. Okay, so this chapter we're covering the importance of problem definition in international research, the problems of available and use of secondary data, sources of secondary data, quantitative and qualitative research methods, multicultural sampling and issues and problems, challenges in less developed countries, and using international marketing research. So let's introduce marketing research for a start. We're talking about systematic gathering, recording, and analysis of data. We're talking about providing useful information for international marketing decision making. So the marketer has a responsibility to find the most accurate and reliable data within limits of time, cost, and technology. International marketing research is necessary when firms are seeking to expand abroad, but it's very challenging, or it can be. Information must be communicated across cultural boundaries, and the application of research tools is different in the environment of a foreign market. So there's three basic market research needs: general information about the country, about the regional area, and the market. We also need information to forecast future marketing requirements. So we're looking at social trends, economic factors, consumer trends, and industry trends. And then on top of both of those things, we need specific information to develop our marketing plan. So the type of specific information that we're looking for there is related to the product and branding, as well as the integrated marketing communications that you want to implement, logistics and distribution, and sales and pricing. So this third type of information is most emphasized in domestic operations, but we need a broader scope to analyze foreign markets, and so that's why the first two are important as well. So the broader scope of research that's necessary in foreign markets is suggested to necessarily include economic and demographic information of that foreign market, cultural emphasis on the cultural, sociological, and political climate of that foreign market, an overview of market conditions of that foreign market, and the technological environment, as well as the competitive situation. So time, cost, and human resources are critical variables in conducting international marketing research. The research process is standard. Regardless of whether you're operating inside or outside of the US, it's internationally accepted that the research process starts by defining the research problem and establishing the research objectives. Then we move to source the information to fulfill those research objectives and consider the costs and benefits of the research effort. Then if we choose to move ahead, we're going to gather the relevant data, first of all from secondary data, and then if necessary, move on to primary sources, but we may actually use a combination of both. Okay, from there, we're going to analyze the data, interpret the findings, and summarize the results, then effectively communicate the results to the decision makers. What's critical in foreign markets in defining a research problem and establishing research objectives is that you as an international organization, you're moving into an unfamiliar environment. And so this tends to cloud the problem definition stage. There may well be failure to anticipate influence of the local culture on whatever issue you're seeking to address. There may be failure to be aware of the self-reference criterion. There may well be failure to establish problem limits broad enough to include all relevant variables. So we must seek to establish information on a greater range of factors in an international marketplace. and this will help to offset this unfamiliarity of the environment issue. There's a wealth of information available in the US, and secondary data is provided, for example, by the government as comprehensive statistics. The US Census Bureau provides statistics on population, housing, business, and agriculture. And then additional market information is also provided by other groups, commercial and trade association, management groups, as well as state and local governments. So the US data that's available as secondary data is superior to many countries, but of course they're striving to improve. The shortcomings faced by foreign marketers include the challenge of available data, language and privacy concerns may well limit access. Then we have to question the reliability of the data, and we have to look at the credibility of the source. Willful errors are common to improve the image of a country or an organisation. And then when you're looking at market-to-market data, you have to question the comparability of the data. So data collected at random times through random methods, and some data may be too broad in the categories, or the definitions may well vary. So we have to validate secondary data. Who collected the data? Is there any reason that they may have purposely misrepresented the facts? For what purpose did they collect the data? What was the methodology? Is it sound? Are the data internally consistent and logical in light of what we know about the market factors? So we're essentially evaluating the credibility of secondary data before we use it. Now, if we seek out secondary data and we find that it's not credible or it's not what we need, so we'll move on to collecting primary data. So while secondary data is data that has been gathered by maybe someone else for a different purpose, but you can access it, primary data is collected specifically for your project. And if the secondary data doesn't do the job, we move on to the primary data. So it's typically gathered by the firm's researcher, or it may well be outsourced with a brief. So the questions that an organisational researcher might seek to address are questions related to sales and distribution and intermediaries and customers, of course. And we're going to definitely consider the most appropriate methodology, which will be driven by the research question, and it may involve quantitative and or quantitative approaches. So what does that mean? Well, quantitative research uses a large sample. It may be an online survey, for example, but it's probably going to be a structured survey with specific response formats, and it's designed to obtain information about behaviour, intentions, attitudes, motivations, and demographics. And it's data that's presented as precise data summarised with percentages, averages, and other statistics. So it's descriptive. The Legos target market, over the years, Legos has tried strategic initiatives to target the young girls market, but they didn't have success until their sixth try and an investment of $40 million globally. That sixth try was a campaign designed primarily from qualitative research findings, and the product line was a huge success, boosting the Legos profits by $1 billion. So what's this thing called qualitative research? Well, it's what I do as a researcher, and it seeks to interpret what a particular segment of the community are understanding about a particular issue. So when the questions are asked, they are typically asked from the participant's perspective. They may well be open-ended and unstructured, and we're seeking to understand that participant's perspective. Qualitative research can involve direct observation, but there definitely needs to be a clear formulation and definition of the research problem. Now that may, for quantitative research, that happens before the research is conducted. For qualitative research, it may happen after the researcher has entered the field. So we're looking to reveal behavioural patterns, phenomenon understanding, and participant perspectives. So what's the problem with gathering primary data? Well, it costs money. It's very expensive. And the product that is in question that's being researched may not be well understood. So respondents may not be able to provide accurate survey responses, and hence we would turn to qualitative research in that regard. There may be an unwillingness to respond as well. Some cultures have different perspectives on the desirability and the ability to be able to respond. And leaders may not look lightly, favourably on the research effort, and so they may seek to present it. We can also outsource research, I mentioned earlier. Here we've got customer service and telephone research being outsourced to lower wage English-speaking countries. So the cost savings in outsourcing may well be balanced with consumer reluctance in cross-cultural communication settings, and particularly those involving voluntary responses to marketing research. We also have some issues in gathering primary data related to sampling. Some countries may lack the adequate demographic data, and it may be difficult to draw reliable, accurate samples. Then we've got the language and comprehension issue. So the language barrier between the marketer, the researcher, and the study respondents. Back translation might be an issue, and literacy impacts success of written surveys. So the complexities involved with kanji in the Japanese language is something that compounds the issue of research. So the differences in the structure of language from English make translation of questionnaires a daunting task. Now, shifting gears to multicultural research. Now we've got a special problem. Companies are seeking to become more global, and they may well seek to standardize the marketing mix across the cultures, but then that's may not be adequate in acknowledging the cultural differences. So you have to compare and contrast language, economies, social structures, behaviors, attitudes, and patterns of culture to help determine how much marketing needs to be adapted to suit a particular market. And you might even need to use different research methods in different cultures to get adequate results. Much research has shifted to the online context. We can do online surveys, online focus groups. We can track web visitor behavioral patterns. We can get direct measures on advertising that goes out online. We can identify consumer we can use identification systems to understand customer behavior. We have email lists that we can use to do our research online. we can embed the research in, for example, various contexts online. And we can do observational research by way of netnography, which is part of what my publications are, and I'm currently doing netnographic studies. So in seeking to estimate market demand, we can turn to expert opinion. Experts are asked about market size and potential growth rates, and triangulation is key here. What we're talking about in terms of triangulation is using multiple sources of data to see if we come up with the same findings and therefore validate the data, validate the findings to some extent. We can also use an analogy where we're assuming demand develops similarly in all countries. So as GDP grows in country X, so does demand for the product. So as GDP grows in country Y, so should its demand for the product. But careful, because correlation does not always equal causation. So as international marketing researchers, we are charged with the task of predicting the future. And even the ancient Greeks consulted the Oracle of Delphi, who resided in the temple that's pictured in this slide. Modern forecasters, thankfully, have better tools, but the hazards of the job are still great. The future ain't what it used to be is a statement from Yogi Berra. Right, then we move into analysis and interpretation of the research findings, and we have to recognise the limitations of foreign data. Information given in surveys is influenced by the meaning of particular words, the attitudes of the respondents, the interviewer's attitude, the context of the interview. Of course, culture and tradition plays a part. And these limitations impact both primary and secondary data, and accepting info at face value is a mistake. You have to do your homework. So how do we cope with these disparities in foreign data? We need a high degree of cultural understanding in the market being researched. We need to understand their social customs, their semantics, their attitudes, and their business customs. We need to creatively adapt our research methods when necessary, and we need to approach the task of data analysis with a skeptical attitude for both primary and secondary data. In terms of who's responsible for conducting market research, we can take a decentralized approach where the foreign-based entity does the research for an organization, and this decentralization is becoming more widely used because the local analysts, the local researchers have more intimate knowledge of that local culture. And a decentralized approach does result in faster and more accurate research being conducted. But there are disadvantages, maybe ineffective communication with the Home Office executives becomes an issue. And then there's potential dominance of large market studies in decisions about global standardization. So both Ford and Philips keep track of European technology and consumers, and they do this to develop their products for global markets in their research centers in Germany. And some of the best technical universities in Europe are close by in Belgium, in the Netherlands, and Germany. Okay, so why are we doing all of this? Because, well, we want to communicate with decision makers, and we want to recognize that obtaining and analyzing data is only half the job. It's really important for researchers to provide organizational executives with useful information in a timely manner. So decision makers should be involved in the research process, definitely in defining the research problem and the question formulation. They need to get a direct a feel for their market, and that's where direct field work can be very useful. But marketing research can be muddied through the process, and so use of research agencies may well further muddy the data. So there are 4 kinds of company, agency, customer relationships. Options B and C on this graphic are better suited for managing the cultural barrier across the chain of communication, and that is, in both cases for B and C, the cultural barrier is bridged within a company where people have a common corporate culture and work together on an everyday basis. And there you go, that's the end of Chapter 8. Thanks again for your attention. I look forward to discussing further in class. Bye for